Surely, I do hope so.
Okay, we'll start in a moment. There's a lot more people joining at last minute though, so just let all those in. Okay, welcome everyone to this Pension Awareness Week, delivered by the Forces Pension Society. Please note that this webinar is going to be recorded. Please, when you're allowed into the webinar, I will continue to do that as we're going along. Make sure that your microphones and cameras are switched off. If you wish to raise any questions during the webinar, please use the chat function and I will answer the questions as the moderator as we go through. And there will be further opportunities to ask questions towards the end of the presentation when the main part of it has been finished. And then Wendy, who is delivering the presentation, and I will answer those in turn. Please read the slide that's up in front of you. This is to prevent any copying of the slides, which are the property of the Forces Pension Society. Please don't replicate or take screenshots of any of these slides. One of the main reasons for that is that the information contained within this webinar can go out of date quickly, and therefore you may inadvertently pass on incorrect information to other people if you share it. Okay, so I will now hand over to Wendy, who will deliver the presentation. Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. And welcome everyone to today's webinar for Pension Awareness Week. My name's Wendy Bandera and I'm the Deputy Head of Pensions with the Forces Pension Society. I'm just going to turn my own camera off now just to preserve the bandwidth, but when we pause at the end for questions, then I will pop it back up on again. Andy's already mentioned that we don't permit copying of this presentation, but towards the end there will be a final slide that'll have some useful information, and please do feel free to take a photo of that with your phone if required. I will remind you when that photo opportunity comes up. Okay, I'll just turn my camera off now. Okay, everyone, so today I'll be covering and looking at the AFPS15 scheme. The focus of today is to give you a clearer understanding of the AFPS15 and its benefits, and to help you plan for your longer term financial future. So let's just, sorry, my slides are just stuck there. Okay, moved it forward. So today I'll take a look at the features of the scheme. We'll look generally at how the scheme works. We'll take a check on commutation that's available with the 15 scheme. We'll also look at the value of your benefits, how you can contribute and add more to the pension, and a little bit at the end, just before we stop for the questions, on taking ownership of your pension. Okay, let's get started then. So the key features of this scheme: it provides, if you reach the 2040 point, that's having 20 years service and reaching age 40, benefits in the form of early departure payments. If you serve till 60, this scheme will provide an immediate pension for those that serve to that point. There's an award if you're medically discharged. It provides death in service benefits of 4 times pensionable salary. There's also dependents benefits available. It's known as a career average revalued earnings scheme, or you may have heard of that abbreviated to CARE. That's really just a reflection of the average of your salary over your period of service. And you can also add to the 15 scheme pension by buying additional pension known as added pension. It's good to know that this scheme is non-contributory. So like the schemes that went before it, 75 and 05, it's non-contributory, which simply means that you don't pay any part of your salary towards the pension scheme. When benefits come into payment, it will provide a tax-free lump sum. It provides a regular income for life, and it's dependent on your age, length of service and salary over time. Let's first of all now consider the trigger points for the AFPS 15 so that you understand when payments are likely to be made. So I'm going to use a timeline to explain this. And on my timeline here, I've got 2. 2 represents 2 years required to vest into the scheme. So less than 2 years will mean that there's no entitlement to any benefits. However, the significant point with this scheme is the 2040 point. And as I've already mentioned, that's 20 years service and have reached age 40. So you have to have both of those conditions together. So the latter, when you reach the latter of those 2 points, that will be your 2040 point. Now, leaving service between the 2-year point and the 2040 point would mean that you would leave with a deferred pension only. When I say deferred pension, it simply means a pension paid at a later date. However, if you reach the 12-year point and leave somewhere between the 12-year point and the 2040 point, in addition to the deferred pension, there's also a resettlement grant. The resettlement grant is a one-off tax-free lump sum. Now, in the case of the 15 scheme, the deferred pension is payable at your state pension age. Now, for those of you listening in today, your state pension age is likely to be age 67 or 68. However, you reach that 2040 point and you're entitled to immediate payments in the form of early departure payments. That's an early departure payment regular income paid monthly and an EDP lump sum, which is a tax-free lump sum. And those payments will pay up to the state pension age when the EDP stops, and then the pension will start. If, however, on this scheme you serve till age 60, then there's no EDP payments. It's simply the immediate pension that's payable from age 60. So no need to wait till state pension age. It pays immediately for those that leave beyond the age of 60. Now, talked about the EDP payments, so we're just going to take a quick look here of how EDP works. So EDP provides you with a tax-free lump sum, and that's based on a multiple of the amount of accrued pension or the pension that you've earned. And it also provides an EDP income stream, which is based on a percentage of the pension earned. Now, the EDP lump sum is always 2.25 times the pension, and the EDP income stream is a percentage based on time served. So I'm just going to show you how that works. Again, I'm going to use a timeline here. And at the point that EDP becomes available, so the 2040 point, then the amount of EDP that would be paid would be 34% of the value of the pension. And then for each, on the anniversary of the 2040 point, so each year afterwards, that percentage increases by a fixed amount of 0.85%. So serving 1 year beyond the 2040 point would see you leave with an award of 34.85% of the value of the pension as EDP. And at 5 years, for example, 38.25%, 10 years, 42.5%, 15 years, 46.75%, and so on. And then that would pay to you until state pension age, when the EDP will stop, and then the pension will start. So we're just going to look and put some figures on that so that you understand how that builds over time a little bit better. We're going to imagine we've got an individual here who starts service. I've got our individual starting in 2015. It's not really the rank that is important here so much as the salary. So you can see on this diagram on the, here that I've got a salary of just over 18,000, and the accrual rate into the 15 scheme is 1/47th. So we take simply 1/47th of that salary over the year, and it's added to the pension value. So you can see 1/47th here is £386. So now after 1 year, £386 has been accrued into the pension. Year 2, salary goes up a little bit, so we've now got a salary of just over 19,500. Again, 1/47th of that value is added to the first year's pension accrual. 1/47th is £418, added to the first year gives us £804. Now, obviously, over time, what's accrued into the pension needs to be uplifted in order to keep its value. And it's uplifted in line with the average weekly earnings index. In this case, for 2016, that was 2%, added to the first year, it added in an additional £8, and now we have an accrued value of £812. Now, just to be clear, when I talk about the pension accrued value here, I'm talking about the annual rate of pension. So you can see after 2 years, this individual has accrued a pension of £812 that will be paid from state pension age. Now I'm going to fast forward 12 years, and at 12 years, if this individual left, they'd be entitled to a resettlement grant, the one-off tax-free lump sum. That's currently just over 14,000, and the deferred pension. Now I've done a quick fast forward, as you can see, 12 years worth of accrual. Our individuals now in a higher rank, salary up to just under 40,000, and we're going to add in the 12th year's accrual. In this instance, it's £840 added. Average earnings has been added in, factored into it, and now we've got a value of £8,281 into the pension fund. Again, I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to move now to the 2040 points. Our individuals served 20 years and reached the age of 40, and they're now entitled to early departure payments if they exit from service. So again, the pension is calculated with all the values added together, and now we've got an accrued pension value of just over £17,500. And so you can see from that how the pension has built over time. Let's put that up. Sorry, sometimes my slides are sticking slightly. So at the 2040 point, this individual with their own career history has achieved an accrued pension of just over 17,500. So of course that is the pension, which is going to be deferred. So now we're just going to have a look at how the EDP works. So with the EDP, of course, at the 2040 point, we saw on the earlier slide on trigger points that EDP is awarded at the rate of 34% of the pension value. So In this instance, the pension we know has reached a value of just over 17.5. 34% of that value is worth just under 6,000. So that's the annual EDP that will be paid if our individual leaves at the 2040 point. In addition to that, of course, there's a tax-free lump sum, and that's paid at the rate of 2.25 times the value of the pension. In this case, multiplying the 17.5 by 2.25 gives us a value of just under 39,500. So you can see from that how the EDP value and the EDP lump sum is worked out. Now the EDP will pay all the way up to state pension age, and then it stops. When it stops, it's your responsibility to claim the pension. And of course, that pension that we saw accrued earlier, just over 17,500, is then payable annually at state pension age. However, you have the ability with this scheme to choose whether you commute and raise a lump sum or remain with the higher pension. To give you an example of the commutation here, you can see that if we apply the full commutation rate, just move my slide forward, then the pension will reduce to just over 11,000. So we now, if we choose to fully commute the maximum amount, the pension would reduce to 11,261, but there'd be a tax-free lump sum of just over 75,000. That's variable, so you can choose whether you want to take a lower tax-free lump sum and a higher pension income, or take it all as income and none of it as a tax-free lump sum. So just to look at the commutation options on the AFPS 15, there are two options for commutation. There's that option we've just seen there with the at the state pension age. So commutation can be taken to raise a tax-free lump sum. And with this scheme, you have an option when the EDP comes into payment to take inverse commutation. Now, inverse commutation works the other way around. It means that you can choose to give up the tax-free EDP lump sum in exchange for an increased EDP income over the period of time that it's payable. So let's just have a little bit of a closer look so that you understand how this works. First of all, we'll take a look at the lump sum creation, and that's available when the pension comes into payment. So using that earlier amount of 17,516, the maximum that can be surrendered is 2056 of the pension accruals. So 2056 of our pension, our annual pension value, gives us 6,255. And then the rule for lump sum creation is that for every £1 of annual pension you give up, you can generate or purchase £12 worth of tax-free lump sum. So multiplying that 2056 by 12 gives us the value of the tax-free lump sum, or the maximum value that's available. Of course, the pension is then reduced by that 2056, which is how we arrive at the reduced value of pension, and that's payable for life. It's never restored to the full value. Let's take a look now at inverse commutation. So as I mentioned, inverse commutation works the other way around, and that's available only with the EDP lump sum. So the option here is an all or nothing option. So you can choose to give up all of that EDP lump sum and generate an increased EDP income stream. So using the example from earlier, or the accrued amount of EDP lump sum, we've got just under 39,500. So if we were to give, or if this individual gave up that 39,411, they would increase the EDP income stream from just under 6,000 to just over 8,000. And that gives an increase of £2,140 a year. Now, this is payable right up until state pension age when the EDP stops. In this example, that's 28 years that the additional payment is going to be in payment. And that means that over that 28 years, there's an additional £60,000, just under £60,000 payable. So that appears to be a gain once we factor in the lump sum that's being given up of about 20,500. But what you must remember here is that the EDP income stream, of course, is taxed. And if we factor in tax at 20%, then the actual gain reduces to about £8,500. And if we factor in tax at the rate of 40%, then there actually isn't a gain in this example. It becomes a negative, so lose out. But there is one factor we can't include in this, and that, of course, is that inflationary increases are applied from the age of 55. Now, of course, if there was a period of high inflation, and bearing in mind that this will be payable over 28 years, then, of course, the figures could look very different. So it's about knowing that this is here as an option, and it might suit your needs to have the higher income. You may, of course, not be a tax rate payer over that period of time, in which case it might be a more favourable option. So just something for you to think about, and know that that exists as a feature on this scheme. Okay, with this scheme, it has other flexibility as well. Sometimes people aren't aware of this. So there's the option to request payment of the pension early. So rather than waiting till state pension age at 67, 68, for example, then the pension can be requested as early as age 55 or anywhere in between 55 and your state pension age. Of course, if you do request it to be paid early, it will be reduced to reflect the longer period of time it's going to be in payment. But an important point to note here is that the EDP, the early departure payments are continue in addition to the pension. So you'll receive the full EDP and the reduced pension alongside. Now, the reduction to the pension is based on your age in years and months, so it changes for each month that you become older, the factor that's used. So as you get older or further towards state pension age, then the reduction will be less severe. And similarly, you can ask for it to be paid early. You can also ask for the pension to be deferred. So you don't have to take the pension at state pension age. You can request that it's deferred. Why might this happen? Well, it might be that you're still employed at that time and you're a higher rate taxpayer and you decide that you'd rather not take the pension and lose a large proportion of it to tax. And in which case you may choose to defer it a year or two. Of course, as we saw with early payment, if you defer it, then it's going to be paid at a slightly higher rate because it'll be in payment for a shorter period of time. Okay, now let's just take a look at what you're worth, or what your pension's worth. So I'm going to show you a comparison here of how much you need to save into a sort of standard pension scheme outside in Civvy Street, so where you literally just save into a pension pot, and at the end of it, that money's available to you to possibly buy an annuity or take as drawdown. So on this table here, you'll see that I've put some pension values on the left-hand side, going up in multiples of 5,000, starting at 10,000 up to 35, and on the right-hand side, how much it would cost to achieve an annuity of that value. Now, annuity rates are quite flexible. They provide quite a lot of different scenarios. In this example, it's for a fixed rate annuity, so the value never increases. The annual pension does not increase with inflation. It's payable from the age of 55, but you have that guarantee it's paid for life. So you can see here that for an annual pension of 10,000, for example, then it will cost roughly £200,000. So you hand over £200,000 and an annual pension is paid of 10,000. So if you were to compare that with your armed forces pension, I think you can see how generous the armed forces pension is, bearing in mind that your armed forces pension increases with inflation annually. From the age of 55. You still get some of the increases before 55 if you've left before 55, but you don't see them till you're 55. It's payable for life, it's guaranteed, and it has dependents benefits. Now, I've just put a note up on the bottom there, you'll see, of course, this doesn't even include early departure payments. So I've shown you annuity rates here from age 55. But if we were to factor in early departure payments potentially payable from age 40, then of course, the value will be even higher. Okay, so I mentioned earlier on that you can add to your pension, so you can purchase additional pension if you wish. So we're just going to have a look at how that works. In terms of the 15 scheme added pension, there's a minimum monthly contribution of £25 or a minimum lump sum contribution of £300. Of course, you can do more than that if you wish. There's tax relief at source, which means it's tax efficient. So what you get the tax back into it. So the premium that's listed is that including tax, which of course normally you would have lost to the taxman. They run in annual contracts, so it's quite simple, the added pension. The idea of the added pension, you take out an annual contract, it finishes at the end, and then if you can either pause it or continue with another annual contract on a renewed basis. And of course, so you can start as you want, you can vary your contributions for each contract that you run. And of course, build up potentially additional pension over time. Now, to be able to do this, there's a Form 6 and 6A. So 6 is a quote for added pension, and the 6A form is to accept the quote. Or if you just want a general idea before you go with a formal quote, you can use the MOD added pension calculator. And I'll give you the details of that on the final slide. Added pension can be purchased for the member only or the member and dependent. Of course, if you purchase added pension for member and dependent, it'll be more expensive because you're requesting that will be paid to your dependent in the event of your death, so there's more risk involved there. And just to remind you that it increases not only your pension payable at state pension age, or 60 if you serve till 60, but it also increases your early departure payments because, of course, they're based on a percentage of any accrued pension. So you'll see it reflected in the EDP income and also the EDP tax-free lump sum. Let's just have a look at an example here of added pension. So added pension is dependent on certain circumstances. So in my example here, this is an individual purchasing member benefits only by monthly contributions, having joined the armed forces at age 21, purchasing the pension, the additional pension, from age 30 for 1 year only, and their state pension is 68. And they're going to leave the armed forces at age 41. So in this example here, you can see that the individual contributes £250 a month for his 1 year contract. Now that's paid directly from salary, so it's paid before tax. And in return for that, for the 1 year of £250 a month, they purchase an additional £184 of annual pension from state pension age for life. Now, the real cost to the member, and we're assuming here that our members are 20% taxpayer, is £2,400. And I've arrived at that figure by multiplying the 250 by 12 and taking away the 20% tax. So it only costs our member £2,400. And what do they get for that £2,400? Well, leaving at age 41, there would be the increase to the EDP lump sum. That would be £414. And the increase to the EDP annual income for 27 years until they reach state pension age. So that's an additional £1,689. When they reach state pension age, the EDP stops, and then, of course, the pension will be increased by £184. We've allowed for 13 years here, being a bit mean, sort of assuming this individual is going to die at 81, but we've put in there 13 years worth of additional pension. And so what we're comparing now is the total additional benefits paid over that time, £4,495, compared with what was put in over the year, the annual contract that was taken. And of course, don't forget, I've not included any inflationary increases in this, but it does increase with inflation annually from the outset, from when the contract, at the end of the first year contract, and it increased with the consumer price index, so CPI. You'll note, of course, that once you receive an income, either in the form of EDP or in the form of pension, that, of course, is subject to your own taxable position. Okay, so let's have a quick summary of AFPS 15 and what we've run through today. This is a different type of scheme from the schemes that have been before. It's a career average revalued earnings scheme. It's still a defined benefit scheme, but it's based on an averaging of your salary, or is a reflection of your salary and income over your period of service. It provides more flexibility than the schemes that have gone before. You've got that flexibility with commutation, you've got more control over it. The pension can be deferred and the pension can be taken early. There are dependents' benefits payable in the event of your death. It has a high accrual rate. And of course, we've just seen how added pension can be purchased with this scheme. So there's a quick sort of summary of the things we've run through. Now, we like to encourage people to take ownership of their pension. And when we mean taking ownership, it's about keeping yourself well informed and up to date with your own pension. How can you do that? Well, here's your photo opportunity, everybody. Do feel free to take a screenshot or a photo with your phone of this page so that you've got this information. But there's a number of ways you can keep up to date with your pension. So you can use the MOD online calculator. There's also a Discover My Benefits page available on gov.uk with lots of useful information. There's the scheme booklets, which are published online, and that's available not just for the 15 scheme, but for the other schemes as well. You can request a formal forecast, and you're entitled to one free forecast each year for your 15 scheme pension, or your pension accrual on the whole. That's done through a pen form 12, which you can do online. You can search online for that. It's also available in a digital form. You can seek guidance from Forces Pension Society, and you can also use the added pension calculator, which I talked about earlier, and there's the address for that. Okay, so that concludes today's lunchtime webinar. I'm going to switch my camera back on now with Andy, and we're going to see whether we've got any questions to talk through. Andy, over to you.
And sensory overload here. Right. Okay. So there's just millions of people joining. There was a couple of questions asked earlier on that I'm going to go back to. Let me try and find them. There's a lot in there now. Just bear with me. We'll go through these in turn. Right. Okay. So we have a question from Duncan, and he says, if I have a break of more than 5 years between the 75 and 05 schemes, and then transferred in a personal stakeholder pension to the 05 scheme to purchase the years back, does that count as continued service for the 15 scheme?
No, it wouldn't count. You've still, the break of more than 5 years would still exist, so you'd still be bound with those restrictions that come with a break of more than 5 years service. Of course, your transfer in will be added to the 05 scheme. It buys you more pension or time, but what it doesn't buy you is time in service.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. There's another question here from Graham, and he says, could you please clarify what pension recycling is? Are you able to deposit your military lump sum and EDP into a SIP?
Okay, pension recycling is about taking tax-free cash from one pension and reinvesting it into another. There are restrictions on the amount of tax-free lump sum that can be recycled. So it does allow for some degree of recycling, that is possible, but it is restricted. If you're thinking of pension recycling, really importantly speak to a financial advisor so that you avoid any heavy tax penalties.
Okay, thanks. And then the last one I had before we'll go on to the new questions was from Tom, and he was wondering if we have any insight into the potential government mutterings regarding the forthcoming budget about removal of the tax-free lump sum threshold, and if it were announced in the budget in November, when is the earliest it might expect it to be introduced?
No, we don't have any insight into that. If only we did, we could answer those questions for you, but I'm afraid no, we have no insight into that whatsoever, I'm afraid. Either whether it will be a likely possibility or not, or any idea on timeframes either. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, we're going down further towards the bottom now. So there was some that I didn't get to by the time you finished. So Sam wants to know what is the maximum of additional pension contributions you can make?
There's not so much a maximum additional contribution you can make, so much as there is a maximum on the amount of additional pension you can purchase. So the current additional pension you can purchase is 8,716. Just I've got it up on my wall here. So yes, 8,716 over. So that's the maximum annual pension that can be purchased. Of course, what you do need to be careful of is how much you put in or contribute into your pension annually in terms of annual allowance. The current limit on annual allowance is 60,000. There is a calculation done to determine what your non-contributory pension would have put in. And then additionally on top of that, you just need to be careful you're not exceeding that limit. But the real limit in terms of added pension is the amount of added pension that can be purchased. So that means you can't increase your public sector pension scheme by more than 8,716 a year.
Just to be clear, to create that level of added pension would cost a significant amount of money. For lots of people, that's running into hundreds of thousands over your career. So it's potentially not achievable to get to that for most people, but nonetheless, the option is there. A question from Lee: how does it take in consideration medical discharge? It's a slightly vague question, but a very quick explanation of the medical discharge terms. I think you covered that in the presentation, but
yeah, I briefly touched on medical discharge. So there is, if you're medically discharged, there is an award for that. Medical discharge in terms of the 15 scheme is based on a tier level, and there are 3 tier levels, 1, 2, or 3. A tier 2 and a tier 3, which are the most severe conditions, provide immediate pensions. A tier 1 will see you leave with EDP as normal if you have reached the 2040 point, and if you have not yet reached the 2040 point, then there'll be a one-off tax-free lump sum payable. That's dependent on age and dependent on salary at exit.
okay. And then someone called Jay is asking if there's any updates on the McLeod cost control mechanism court case.
No, we don't have an update on the McLeod cost control mechanism case. I haven't heard much on that actually recently. I don't know about you, Andy, whether you've heard much on that. I don't
No.
think there's been really any updates on it recently.
No, what I would say is that for anyone who is tracking that, if we do receive any further information, then we normally upload those sorts of things onto our website. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
Paul asks if all the remediable service statements have been sent out, and the simple answer to that is no. If you're in the immediate choice cohort and you've already left, you should receive, well, you will receive that in due course. When you get that will depend on how complicated your circumstances are. The current update from the MOD is that they will all be issued by the end of March 2026, but you should receive a letter if you're going to have a significant delay to that. David's asking about, do the added pension options still exist on FTRS? Yes, they very much do. You can make additional contributions to your 15 scheme in any form of service. It will work slightly differently if you're in part-time reserve service, because you're not in receipt of a annual income, and a lump sum would be the only way to really do that. But if you're in FTRS, yes, you can make additional contributions. One for you here, Wendy, perhaps. Timothy, I think his name is asking if there's an age, i.e. proximity to retirement, where added pension purchase is not worth doing.
No, and don't be afraid to use the calculator, the MOD calculator, or request a formal forecast. But I have seen plenty of people take out added pension late on in service and still benefit from it.
Yeah, I think
you will need to go in and sort of put your own sort of figures in, and you'll be able to see for yourself. So it's still got that tax efficiency to it, and obviously, as I said, it is dependent on age when you start the contract, and of course how much you're contributing in. But yeah, certainly worth looking at.
We would also recommend that you get financial advice before you make contributions, just to make sure that that's the right investment model for yourself. Jamie, we've already covered that. Really, is the tax-free element of lump sum under threat by the current government, TBC. Is the 15 scheme able to be transferred to other public sectors, i.e. the fire service? So if you leave service with a deferred 15 pension, yes, that can be transferred into another public sector defined benefit scheme. It can't be transferred into any civilian schemes, but it's possible to transfer it into another public sector scheme. That's only if it's deferred. If it's in payment, of course, it's not possible to transfer it. Someone's asking when the next webinar covering the 75 scheme is. I don't know the answer to that. Mike Davis is asking, when you send off the Form 6, a quote is sent back with how much your pension goes up by. This increase is always significantly less than how much you put in. So Wendy, would you expand on that?
Yeah, it's important to just understand what that quote is giving you. So, yes, you put in more. What it actually shows you is how much you're going to buy annually. So you'll get that value every year for the rest of your life from state pension age. And as I mentioned before, if you leave with entitlement to EDP, then it'll be in your EDP as well. So there'll be an increase to that. So I think if you remember back to the example I talked through in the webinar, the individual put in 2,400 but gets £184 payable for life, and also EDP increase payable for the time that EDP is in place. And you saw that just doing a sort of like for like, we had 2,400 contrasted with 4,500. And of course, what I hadn't put in there was any inflationary increases. Sorry, Andy, you're muted.
Sorry. Steve asks, if I'm still serving at 60, I can get an immediate pension at discharge. Specifically for reservists, what counts as still serving? Well, I've seen confirmation of this with respect to other members, and it means that if you are in a contract where you are available to be called to serve, then you are classed as being in pensionable service. So if you're in part-time volunteer reserve service, for example, and you only do 20 or 30 days a year, as long as you're inside that contract, you don't necessarily need to be in your uniform at the age of 60 in order to get your pension. As long as you're available to be called in for a day's service, then you are classed as being in the scheme. Daryl is asking about deferring your 15 pension and how do you work out the additional value that's added to it by deferring it? And the pension calculator clearly doesn't do that.
No, you would need to ask for that from Veterans UK if you were thinking of deferring it. I can't give you a value on it because it's based on a set of factors. So the factors would have to be referred to increase the value of the pension. So the idea with calling for the pension early or deferring the pension is that you don't lose out. It's the same amount of pension, but it's condensed into a shorter period of time or a longer period of time. But yes, it is it's dependent on Government Actuary Department factors applied, which will give a revised value to the pension depending on how long you're going to defer it for.
Okay. Duncan, again, we've already really covered this, Duncan. 2 to 3 years before retiring at 60 as FTRS, is it worth making additional pension contributions? Potentially, yes, both for the tax efficiencies as you put it in, and as Wendy explained to the other person, there are still benefits. But again, that might be something for a financial advisor to guide you on.
Just to sort of cover off on that, what you must remember with added pension is it's guaranteed. So there is no financial risk to your money. It's guaranteed, it's payable for life, and it comes with dependence benefits if you purchase them or if you choose not to. So you haven't got that degree of risk with your funding that you have if you were to purchase, for example, or put your money into a SIP where it's got a degree of risk with it.
Okay, a question here, is there an 1840 or does it fall into the same policy as 2040? So I think what you're referring to there is there's EDP trigger points for the 05 scheme and the 15 scheme. So on the 05 scheme, to qualify for EDP at discharge, you need to have completed 18 years of service and reached 40 years of age. On the 15 scheme, which is separate, you need to also meet the conditions of that scheme to get EDP, which is completing 20 years of service and reaching 40 years of age. Of course, for a lot of people, the age of 40 ties you into both of those, but depending on when you've joined, you need to consider your discharge date carefully if you want to qualify for both of those at discharge. It's quite possible that you might reach your 1840 point before you reach your 2040 point, in which case you'd only get 05 EDP. So the rules of your legacy scheme that you were a member of before you transferred to the 15 also need to be met That's an important point when you're considering timing your retirement. Johnny asks, what is the difference between the legacy and the 15? Well, if you joined on the 75 or the 05 scheme, if you're in regular service, or the RFPS 05 if you're FTRS, and so on, that's referred to as your legacy scheme. And then the 15 scheme is the scheme that has been in force since either the 1st of April 2015 or the 1st of April 2022, depending on whether you're in scope for the remedy or not. And of course, if you are in scope, you will have the option to choose between your legacy and the 15 for the remedy period. Okay, Matthew appears to have answered a question there. If we take commutation, will there be an increase after state pension age at 67? No. If you take commutation at the point of discharge, if you're 60 years of age, or whenever you take the pension, if you opt for commutation to create a tax-free lump sum from the 15 scheme, then the result in reduction in the annual pension remains in place for life. Aidan asks, does the increase with average weekly earnings index count towards the annual limit?
Yes, that counts towards your contribution into the scheme. But what you've got to remember with added pension is it's not actually your contribution into the scheme. It works on the value of the benefit at the beginning of the tax year and the value of the benefit at the end of the tax year, the difference between the two, and a multiplier. So that difference will include the average weekly earnings, but it's not quite calculated the same way as, for example, if you were contributing into a defined contribution, defined contribution, or a SIP, for example. So with a SIP, if you put £10,000 into your pension, that's your contribution. If you contribute £10,000 into added pension, then it will look at the value of the pension, which will be zero at the beginning of the tax year, the value of the pension at the end, or the added pension at the end, which will be 10,000. It'll end up multiplying the two, and then it's the difference between the two using a multiplier of 16. It's a little bit more complex, but it's just not quite as simple as the actual physical amount you put in. But yes, AWE is factored into that calculation.
Okay, I've put a link up to those people who want to do added pension. I've put a link up to the Veterans UK forms site a couple of times. You'll find the forms in there. It's form 6 and a 6 alpha to make the contribution. Alex is asking, what's the difference between a benefit information statement and a remediable information statement? Well, the benefit information statement that you get just after your birthday each year on JPA is just a snapshot of what your pension benefits are worth at the time it's produced. It is not a forecast of what you're going to get when you leave. And in some cases, of course, if you're under the age of 40 or you haven't completed the necessary time to qualify for EDP, then that will show as a 0 on there, which sometimes causes alarm, but it's because it's not a forecast of what you'll get when you leave. In the same way, there's different types of remediable service statements. Firstly, there's one that's called an information-only RSS, which lots of people have had. And again, that is not a forecast of what you'll get when you leave. It's just a snapshot of what your pension benefits are worth at that point. But of course, it gives both remedy positions. If you want to see what your pension benefits will look like when you leave, you need to submit an AFPS form 12 to Veterans UK. You'll also, if you're in scope for the remedy, receive a service leavers RSS shortly before you leave, and that will be a forecast of what you get when you leave, and that's the information that you will be able to use to make your decision when you're applying for your pension benefits at the end of your service. Mike has come and asked a question, can you apply for a medical pension, aka war pension, if eligible, if you have not received any Armed Forces Compensation Scheme payments and the injury was before 2006?
Yes, you can apply for a war pension if the injury occurred before 2006.
I think it might, I'm not sure of the exact date, I think it's April 2005. Are you sure on that, Wendy? Or?
I thought it was 2006, but
Okay.
if you think it's 2005, I'll do a double check on it.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, Mike. But yes, if your injury or illness occurred before a certain point, then yes, you can apply for a war pension after you've left service. Armed Forces Compensation Scheme payments cover injuries that occurred later, and there is a time limit after you've left. I believe it's 7 years to make that claim. John asks, I took the offer to transfer from 75 to 05 in the regular army and then discharged in November 2019. I rejoined on FTRS with the RAF in March 2022. I'm receiving my 05 EDP monthly payments during my FTRS contract. Is this correct? No.
No,
It's
I don't
not.
believe that is correct. You might want to check on that.
John, if you're in receipt of a 05 pension, then that will remain in payment, but it might be abated. But if you only got 05 EDP at the end of your service, then the monthly payments for that should cease when you rejoin, even if you rejoin 3, 5, 10, 15 years later. So that might be something that you need to address. If it's definitely EDP, if it's pension, you don't need to worry, but EDP should have stopped.
I'll just say it's confirmed there. It's 2005 when the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme took over, not 2006. So that was correct, 2005.
Yeah, I think it was, might have been the 5th of April 2005, I believe it was. Would FTRS contributions change EDP if already in receipt? Not 100% sure what that means, but if you're 15 scheme EDP, yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I think what he's saying there is if you, your FTRS does not accrue any EDP. So any pension that is accrued through FTRS doesn't have a link to EDP. So you can't increase your EDP benefits through FTRS service. It would only be the pension benefits that would be accruable.
Guy, yes, the presentation is recorded and it will be available for 3 days, I believe, after this. So a question here, after transferring from regular to commission in a different service, which pension takes presidency? 22 years or 18 years? I'm not 100% sure what you mean, but if you transfer from one,
I think that's probably a slight confusion then with 22 and 18. I think there's a couple of points there. I think one, if you're talking about commissioning, and therefore you go from a non-commissioned rank to a commissioned rank, then you would go under the rules of the commissioned rank. So it wouldn't be the 22 years, it would be less for the 75 scheme. But I wonder also if you're talking about the rules of the scheme actually applying. So if you had 75 scheme accrual, then that particular period of time that accrued 75 will be based on 22 years if you're non-commissioned, or 16 years if you're commissioned from age 21 or 18. And then if you had time in a different scheme, for example, 15 scheme, where you're required to have 20 years and reach age 40, that period of time on that scheme would fall under those rules. So it's the rules of the scheme that apply to the period of service. And just the other thing was, if you're talking about commissioning there, then it would lose the 22-year link if it's a 75 scheme, but it would be then from age 21 and not from age 18. I hope that answers that.
Okay, we've got a minute left before we close. So probably won't get through all of these questions, but Lee is asking, how does the pension work if you're med discharged tier 2 or tier 3 with a JIP? Is it tax free? If you are discharged under any tier that isn't necessarily a pointer towards whether or not your pension will become tax-free. It's whether or not it's decided that the injury or illness that led to your discharge was caused by service. And if it was, then it's possible that the pension benefits will become tax-free. And of course, if you've received a GIP, which is compensation for an injury or illness, if that GIP was awarded for the same injury or illness that was for the primary invaliding condition, i.e. the reason you got medically discharged, then that strengthens your case. I think that's about as much as we're going to get through, Wendy. There's a couple of questions at the bottom, but they have in large been answered.
That's great. Well, that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Andy, for moderating today, and thank you to everyone for listening in to today's lunchtime webinar. I do sincerely hope you've all taken something away from it. So that's all from us. We'll sign out now. We'll switch off our cameras. Lots of thumbs up and clapping there, so thank you very much for that.